So why do we look the way we do? Well, as we've been talking about, it's all about the genetics. So here we can see the female in pink and the male in blue. Each cell undergoes meiosis to produce a haploid egg or sperm. The joining of egg and sperm is called fertilization, and when fertilization happens, a zygote is produced. That zygote will eventually become an embryo. During that development, from an embryo to the baby, it will undergo mitosis and development. So on the chromosomes passed from mom and dad to the offspring are genes. Okay, some of them will have the same information. However, like we kind of talked about in class, they may also have different information. So here from the dad, we have this yellow allele at the top of the gene that will code for eye color, but is it blue or brown? Well, the mom also has one, and it can also code for eye color, either blue or brown. So if we're talking about eye color, we're going to run through some examples of what can actually happen. So genes come in different versions, brown versus blue eyes in this case, or we can talk about brown versus blonde hair. Each of these traits is controlled by alleles. And we said in class that the allele is some part of the chromosome that codes for a certain trait. So if we have mom with blue eyes and dad with brown eyes, their children, if they have 4, they would all have brown eyes. In this case, where did the blue eyes go? Well, if dad was a big B, and mom was a little b, or another way to say this is dad was a homozygous dominant and the mom was homozygous recessive. These will combine so that each of their children will actually be big B, little b, or heterozygous. And in class we talked about dominant versus recessive, so in each of their children, the big B will mask or completely suppress the little b. So their phenotype will be brown eyes. So another example is if the same pair had this set of children. Here we have blue eyes. So why did they stay? Well, if the dad was big B, little b, and the mom was again a homozygous recessive for little b, then those can make these following combinations. And we can see that half the children will be brown-eyed and half of them will be blue-eyed. Now, if mom and dad both have brown eyes and these are their children, well, we have a child with blue eyes. So where did they come from? Well, if dad and mom were both heterozygous, meaning that they had both a dominant and recessive allele, then their children could be any of these. However, this fourth one has received both recessive alleles, therefore the phenotype will be blue eyes. So we've been talking about some of this in class and how genes have different versions. So alleles are inherited separately from each parent. So in this case, we're talking about brown and blue eye color. And they are not blending. So we're not having blue and brown make green eyes. This is the case where some alleles mask others. So brown eye color masked blue. That is called dominance. Okay, so paired chromosomes have the same kind of genes, but may have different alleles. So here, if we were to pair these up by length, then we would get these. Each allele contains a gene here for eye color and here for hair color. Based on what kind of gene that they receive, either dominant or recessive, it will affect how that phenotype of the person is. So here, if we had brown eyes and brown is dominant, if they have a big B and a little b, their phenotype would be brown eyes, while their genotype is heterozygous. Here, if they have, for hair color, if they have a little b, that might be blonde, so they're homozygous recessive. For each trait, an organism inherits 2 copies of that gene, one from each parent. So a diploid organism inherits 1 set of chromosomes from each parent. Diploid, remember, means 2 sets of chromosomes. So you'll get 1 from mom and 1 from dad. Each will have the same gene. And remember, in this example here, it is talking about flowers. These are homologous chromosomes, meaning that each chromosome contains the same information. So here, you have to remember that although one individual will have a big B and big B in this instance, when this female makes gametes, half will go to one egg and half can go to another. So if she's big, little b, then she will be able to give 2 little b's. However, if she has 1 large B and 1 small b, then she might be able to donate either a dominant or recessive allele. So this should be a little bit of a review. If we have 2 of the same letters, so big B or little b, we call that homozygous. For homozygous dominant, we are talking about the big B. Homozygous recessive is little b. So the dominant is meaning that they have the same dominant allele or the same recessive allele. Here, we're talking about 2 different alleles. This will be heterozygous. And many of you already know about Punnett squares, but for those of you who don't, this is just a simple way to visualize what would happen if these 2 individuals created babies. So here at the top part will basically give you the male option. So here the male is a big B, little b. On the side, it's the same thing except we're dealing with the female. So what can the female donate to the offspring? And in this case, she is also big B, little b. These would be your results. So you basically carry this big B down to each of these, this little b down to each, and then over the same way. You carry this big B here, this big B here, the little b here, and here. So that in this box we have big B, so we are homozygous dominant. Here we have big B, little b, which is heterozygous, which is the same thing here. Big B from the male, little b from the female, it is heterozygous. Then here we have little b, which is homozygous recessive. Now, here we're talking about genotypes, while the smiley faces that popped up will demonstrate phenotypes. So 3 out of the 4 children had brown eyes, while 1 out of the 4 had blue. There can be a difference between how an organism looks and its genetics. So this is the phenotype, or how the trait is actually seen. Or a genotype was the actual genetic makeup. What do the alleles actually say? The 2 people can have the same phenotype, but have 2 different genotypes. How are these brown eyes made? Well, if we take these 2 alleles from these 2 chromosomes, you can have something that codes for brown and brown. In this case, it would be heterozygous dominant, and she would get a big B. Or she could have gotten chromosomes that code for brown eyes and 1 for blue, and get a big B, little b, which would still show brown eyes.